Chapter 267 to 270. At this time, Shino asked Shinichi, "She is?" Shinichi obviously knew that he must introduce Tsukihei to the other members of Akatsuki, otherwise it would be impossible to bring her to the ritual site. Shinichi said, "She is a subordinate and informant of mine, who has been staying in Konohagakure as my spy to pass on the critical information that I need." Shino nodded as he looked at the supposed spy, Uchiha Tsukihei. Shinichi's explanation wasn't strange, and Shino did not doubt those words. For Akatsuki to function properly, there is an obvious need for spies infiltrated in the major shinobi villages. Moreover, even after defection, Shinichi has shown that he is deeply informed of the events taking place in Konohagakure and Land of Fire. This can only be achieved when he has some spies responding to him. But Shino was really surprised by the appearance of Uchiha Tsukihei. Although Shino has seen many beauties throughout his life as a shinobi, the kunoichi standing behind Shinichi seemed to have a very eye-catching appearance. As such, even Shino can't help but take extra glances at her. Not caring about Shino's looks, Shinichi glanced at the kunoichi standing behind Shino and asked, "And who is she? Why have I never seen her before?" Shino turned his gaze towards Shinichi and said with a smile, "Oh, she? She is my newly recruited assistant, to help me in the experiments and tests." As soon as he heard Shino mention the tests and experiments, Shinichi can't help but frown. A few months ago, Shinichi happened to have observed one of Shino and Hiriko's experiments. Out of curiosity, he decided to see just what they were doing. It was at the time when Hiriko's chimera technique was far from being perfect, and the bloody experiments were still ongoing. After he watched one of the experiments, even Shinichi, who has been long accustomed to seeing life and death, was grossed out and disgusted. Therefore, when Shino mentioned experiments and tests, Shinichi felt his stomach churning. He was feeling sick of remembering that sight. Controlling himself to get rid of nausea, Shinichi looked at Tsukihei and nodded. Both Shinichi and Shino don't have any deep friendship, so after just a casual greeting, Shinichi did not say anything more, walked forward, directly bypassed Shino and his assistant, and moved towards the inner parts of the temporary secret base. Tsukihei followed Shinichi, and as she went past Shino's assistant, the other party smiled towards her and asked politely, "What is your name?" Tsukihei was surprised, stopped for a moment to take a close look at the other party, and politely said, "I am Uchiha Tsukihei, how about you, lady?" The woman licked her lips and said with a soft giggle, "Uchiha-san can call me Oto Yumi." Tsukihei nodded and then walked past Yumi, following Shinichi. After both Shinichi and Tsukihei were far away from Shino and Yumi, Shinichi whispered, "That person Shino is Hiriko's partner, so I think he is at least worthy of attention if you are looking for Hiriko's ritual." Tsukihei nodded and asked, "Have you never seen that woman named Oto Yumi?" Shinichi nodded, "Yes, this is the first time I have seen her." After a pause, Shinichi asked, "To be honest, I don't really care about who Shino brings as his assistant and whatnot. The only reason I even asked who she was because I felt strong malice and greed directed towards me, and she was also looking at us strangely, so I just wanted to confirm if I have ever known her or did something to offend her, but I couldn't remember her. It would be best to stay vigilant against her." Tsukihei nodded, as she understands that Uchiha Shinichi also has an extraordinary level of perception, so she attached great importance to Shinichi's judgment, but as she took a few steps she halted momentarily as she suddenly realized something. It's because she suddenly realized why she felt that the woman with the name Oto Yumi seemed inexplicably familiar to her. After all, that woman is none other than Orochimaru. And it seems that Orochimaru has replaced his body using the Kinjutsu, living corpse reincarnation. In the original story, this appearance of Orochimaru was only briefly shown during the Konoha Crush arc, when Orochimaru fought against Sandaime during the Chunin exams finals, so Kuroto couldn't recognize this appearance of Orochimaru instantly. No wonder she was looking at Shinichi with greed and malice. It appears that Orochimaru/Yumi is still after Shinichi's Manjikyu Sharingan. And now that I think about it, as soon as I introduced myself as Uchiha Tsukihei, Yumi licked her lips. It appears that now I am also Orochimaru's target. Doesn't matter, I guess. It really didn't matter. But what surprised Tsukihei was the fact that Orochimaru actually came here. It's not hard for one to guess that the only reason Orochimaru is here the same as Kuroto, to observe Hiriko's Kekii Genkai absorption ritual. Orochimaru may disdain Hiriko, he still maintains a degree of attention and interest towards Hiriko's chimera technique. As for how Orochimaru got Shino's help, is there even a reason to ask this? Orochimaru and Shino have colluded with each other more than a few times even before either of them joined Akatsuki, so it isn't surprising that Shino was willing to help Orochimaru sneak here. After realizing that Oto Yumi is none other than Orochimaru, Tsukihei decided to not think about her for now, and instead observed the so-called temporary base of Akatsuki. After walking for a few minutes, Tsukihei, who silently followed Shinichi, arrived near the rest area and met Shinichi's partner Biwa Juzo. Even Biwa Juzo wasn't much surprised when he learned the identity of the kunoichi following Shinichi, because all the official members have some subordinates that they use for their information network. Besides, Juzo doesn't care about what Shinichi does so long as Shinichi does not betray Akatsuki. Time passed day by day, and soon it was the day when Hirako will be holding his ritual ceremony. These past few days, Tsukihei spent in the Amage cure, and she was obviously not worried about her absence being noticed in Konoha. This is because Shisui was constantly maintaining a shadow clone that acted up to cover up his absence. Day of the ritual. The location chosen by Hirako for the ritual was not in Amage cure or the Land of Rain where the base camp of Akatsuki organization is located, but on a high mountain in a neighboring country, the Land of Earth. Following Shinichi and Biwa Juzo, Tsukihei also came to this mountain. The other duo of Akatsuki, which included the Sasori Kakuzu duo, Shinooto Yumi, each chose a different route to arrive at the decided location. As everyone gathered at the mountain in the Land of Earth, Tsukihei swept her gaze across everyone, and thought, except for Pain, Konan, Obito, and Zetsu, all the members of Akatsuki are here, and even Obito and Zetsu may be nearby, but they are probably not showing up here. After thinking so, Tsukihei's gaze turned towards the high platform on top of the mountain. At this time, on the top of the mountain platform, 5 to 6 dozens of large mirrors were placed. These mirrors were placed at different angles and they seemed to be gathering all the light from the sky and reflecting all the light at one point on the center of the platform. At the very center of the platform, Hirako sat quietly. His face seemed to be calm, but everyone can notice that he was trying to suppress the madness and excitement in his heart. This was clearly evident from his trembling hands. As Tsukihei was taking a view of the ritual site, suddenly the previously clear sky darkened. Dark clouds gathered out of thin air, covering the sky, and crepuscular rays of light fell on the ritual platform, along with the light drizzle falling from the sky. The appearance of the rain clouds was so abrupt that Tsukihei can't help but think of only one possibility that might be a possible cause. Is this rain tiger at will technique? Sure enough, a few minutes after the rain started, a person with orange hair, with so many black piercings across his nose and ears, wearing the traditional Akatsuki organization cloak, and an Amagekure forehead protector with a long horizontal scratch descended down to the top of the platform. Tendo Pain. Following him was a kunoichi with short straight blue hair tied in a small bun, with a liberated piercing, an origami flower over the bun, wearing the traditional Akatsuki cloak, and a pair of paper wings behind her back. Konan. Uchiha Tsukihei stared at the ripple pattern's eyes in the eye sockets of Tendo Pain and thought, so that's Rinnegan? The strongest of the 3 great dojutsu. While Tsukihei was looking at Pain and Konan, Pain's indifferent gaze swept over all the shinobi gathered at the platform, stayed on Tsukihei for a moment, then turned towards Hirako, who sat at the center of the platform, and said, there is no one other than Akatsuki members present here, you can start any time you are ready. Hirako nodded, and immediately looked up at the sky. He was waiting for something, and just as Pain deactivated Rain Tiger at will technique, the sky again became clear. While Hirako started the final preparation, Tsukihei thought, even Pain and Konan are here. Does Akatsuki attaches so much importance to Hirako's Kekkei Genkai absorption ritual? With doubts in her heart, Tsukihei swept her gaze to other places, trying to find Obito and Zetsu's figure, and at this moment her gaze met with Oto Yumi's gaze. The two guys, pretending to be girls, looked at each other. Both had an awkward expression for a while, then both of them turned away without showing any unnatural trace. Kuroto cursed, "Tch, Orochimaru really is so courageous. Is he really not afraid to be seen through by Akatsuki? Or does he think that he won't die no matter what happens?" Orochimaru smirked, "Tisk tisk, another Uchiha. If I can't take over Uchiha Shinichi's body, then this Uchiha Tsukihei is also not a bad option provided she is good enough." Both of them have momentary thoughts which were soon put away as their attention turned towards the center of the platform where Hirako stood. On a high cliff covered with some vegetation. The masked man sat on the edge of the cliff, with one of his legs hanging. Zetsu stood on the side. Most of them said that they don't care about Hirako's ritual, but now that the ritual is taking place, all of them are present here. Most of all, I am surprised that Uchiha Shinichi is also present here. The masked man said, if Hirako's ritual really succeeds, it will probably change the pattern of the shinobi world. No one can remain indifferent, and completely ignore such a thing. Yes. Zetsu nodded. Even the self-proclaimed god, Nagato, is also here in person. The masked man glanced in the distance, and said, if not for the threat of Amatsukami, I would not have encouraged Nagato to support Hirako's experiments. Zetsu turned to look at the masked man and asked, are you worried that Hirako might get out of hands? The masked man was silent for a while, then said, if Hirako truly manages to successfully absorb all the 5 Kekii Genkai that he has selected, then no one would be able to predict how strong will he become. Zetsu said, with the presence of Nagato, we don't really need to worry, regardless of how strong Hirako may become, in the end, he will remain a pawn. The masked man did not reply but turned to look at the 2 kunoichi, one standing next to Uchiha Shinichi and the other next to Shino, and asked, have you checked the identities of those 2? The woman next to Uchiha Shinichi is named Uchiha Tsukihai. According to Shinichi, she is his spy who has been lurking in Konohagakure. While the woman next to Shino is called Oto Yumi, a newly recruited assistant under him, but I was unable to find out if their identities are truly what they claim. Uchiha Tsukihai. With a frown, the masked man muttered with a thoughtful expression, was there someone with this name in the Uchiha clan? The masked man is different from Shinichi. At the time of his death, he was a chunin similar to Hyuga Kuroto, and his status in the Uchiha clan was also very low, similar to Hyuga Kuroto. Therefore, he was oblivious to many of the internal matters of the Uchiha clan, so he can't really figure out who Uchiha Tsukihai was. As such, the masked man has some doubts about Uchiha Tsukihai. He cannot, like Uchiha Shinichi, assert that there is no Uchiha Tsukihai within the Uchiha clan. After all, it is very common for many clans to keep the existence of certain individuals a secret, keep them hidden in the dark since birth or early childhood, and train them secretly. Back to the platform. Hirako showed a twisted expression on his face while looking at the sky. His expression was a mix of expectation, joy, madness, anxiety, nervousness, and so on. At this time, the sun hanging high in the sky was obscured by another celestial body, and the original bright and clear sky dimmed as if it was the time of dusk. While everyone was looking at the changes brought by the solar eclipse, some brilliant spots of light flashed across the dark sky. Hirako exclaimed in excitement, finally, it's about time. As soon as the green aurora light lashed across the sky, Hirako started printing the hand seals and then pressed his palm on the ground. Boom, shake, shake. Instantly, 5 cross-shaped structures rose up from the 5 vertices of the 5-pointed star that lied on the pentagon platform. On each metal cross, a shinobi in a half-dead state was crucified. These 5 are the unlucky shinobi targeted by Hirako, thought Tsukihai as she swept her gaze across the 5 people. Finally, her gaze landed on Uchiha Hiragi, and she sighed softly. Unlike Uchiha Tsukihai, who had a somewhat complicated look, Yumi on the other hand had a look full of expectations. At this time, the intensity and brightness of aurora lights became stronger and stronger, and they seemed to represent a green curtain of light. This green curtain of light covered the entire sky, intertwined across the edges, giving the sky a dreamy and awe-inspiring look. As the brightness and intensity of the curtain grew, sparkling particles and rays of light sprinkled from the sky and fell on the 5-pointed star platform on top of the mountain. The huge mirrors, each with a height of more than 10 meters, concentrated the rays of green aurora lights in one direction, which illuminated Hirako standing at the center of the 5-pointed star formation. The moment aurora light gathered at Hirako, everyone present at the site could clearly feel an intensive rise in Hirako's chakra reaction. Even both Uchiha Tsukihai and Shinichi had long since activated their Sharingan, trying to capture all the changes taking place in Hirako's body. Sasori, who was no longer hiding in his Hirako puppet, also had a solemn look. Kakuzu took a step back, his instincts were telling him to take a defensive posture because something was coming. Shino's was intently looking at everything, and even Yumi had a look mixed with traces of anticipation as well as some unknown fear. Tendo Pain was still had his indifferent look, but Konan had a frowned expression. The intensity and brightness of the green aurora lights became more and more dazzling to the extent that they seemed to carry life within them and would burn anything they touch. The lights seemed to be alive, jumping, flashing, and moving around Hirako's body. The glittering green particles were falling from the sky like a steady and slow rain. Uchiha Tsukihai muttered, such strong chakra reaction, and such a beautiful sight. If not for what was about to happen soon, this sight was akin to a fairy tale. Tsukihai was really surprised. With the help of celestial phenomenon, the intensity of chakra fluctuations coming from Hirako has reached a terrifying point. And what surprised her more was the fact that Hirako's small body was able to withstand such a terrifying chakra pressure without showing any signs of pain. While Tsukihai was surprised, Hirako did not stop and began to print the hand seals to start the next phase of his Kekii Genkai absorption ritual. While Tsukihai was surprised, Hirako did not stop and began to print the hand seals. Finally completing the hand seals, Hirako shouted, Chimera technique. With the crazy shout of Hirako, the indigo-colored semi-solid glue-lychee substance gushed out of the pentagram-shaped surface and rushed to swallow the 5 half-dead crucified ninjas. This gluey substance was like an extension of Hirako's body. It spread all over the 5-pointed star formation, and seemed to be acting as per Hirako's orders, swallowing the 5 ninjas that were crucified on the torture cross. At the moment when the gluey substance started swallowing the 5 ninjas with different Kekii Genkai, these ninjas who were half dead and unconscious let out a terrible cry of pain that seemed to shake their soul. They put up an instinctive struggle, but all they got was despair. Their bodies also turned indigo-colored and soon began to melt bit by bit. Their pupils disappeared, and only white sclera could be seen in their eyes, foam overflowing from their mouths, a lifeless look on their faces. Hirako opened both his arms and laughed frantically. Cry all you want, feel the despair in your heart, then be swallowed by me to become a truly great being, a perfect shinobi. Looking at Hirako, whose current state was nothing different from a monster, and the 5 shinobi melting and slowly integrating into Hirako, Uchiha Tsukihei had a serious look on her face and muttered, "This approach is too forced." After the initial shock, there was only thought left in Tsukihei's mind. In her view, the fusion method that Hirako is using is really rough, unscrupulous, and forced. Is he not afraid of the hidden dangers he will have to face in the future by using such a forceful method? No, rather than worrying about the future, what he should think about is whether he will be able to survive the complete fusion. The matter of the future comes afterward, thought Tsukihei with a doubtful expression. Tsukihei believes that Hirako is not an idiot, at least he doesn't look like one. After all, he managed to develop the chimera technique, but the approach he is using right now is no different from suicide, which is utterly stupid. As such, aside from shock, there are also some expectations to see if Hirako has some follow-up plans to ensure his success. With the bodies of the 5 shinobi completely melted, their chakra was steadily absorbed by the gluey substance. Tsukihei thought, how will he deal with the souls of those 5 shinobi? The same thought lingered in the minds of Tendo Pain, Oto Yumi aka Orochimaru, Sasori, and Kakuzu. Ninjendo Pain of the Pain Rikudo grants the user the ability to forcefully read the minds of any target by extracting their soul. As such, it wouldn't be wrong to say that Pain is one of the few people familiar souls. Even Orochimaru, who has developed Fushire Tensei, and is probably working on Edo Tensei, also has a very high degree of understanding of souls. Then there is Sasori, who has recently turned himself into a puppet, which is impossible to do without having some knowledge of souls, so he has also touched the realm of souls. And finally, there is Kakuzu, because of his secret technique, Earth Grudge Fear. Every time he steals others' hearts, he has to have some way to reduce the influence of their souls on the chakra nature. As such, Kakuzu must also have some degree of understanding of soul. Shino must also have some understanding of the souls because he is working on making Reibi. As for Konan and Shinichi, their understanding of souls is worse compared to the rest, but neither of the two was ignorant. And Konan, being a sensor class, and Shinichi with the help of his Manjikyu Sharingan, was able to notice that the chakra absorbed by the gluey substance was not ordinary. As such, everyone had a frown and thought the same thing, is he directly going to absorb that chakra? Just as various speculations appeared in the minds of everyone present, Hirako directly controlled the gluey substance and sucked in the 5 chakra groups. He is really taking the reckless approach. Tsukihei was shocked. She always thought that each generation of Reikage is the second most reckless shinobi in this world, but it appears that even Hirako is not far behind. Unlike Tsukihei's shocked expression, the others did not show many emotions. Oto Yumi even smirked. Nobody here seemed to understand the true danger of completely absorbing other people's souls, even if they can see the essence of chakra that Hirako was absorbing. Tsukihei felt a bit of pity for Hirako. In her view, although Hirako might succeed even with his reckless approach, and there is even hope for him to become incredibly strong. But he is also giving birth to hidden dangers that will show up sooner or later. He does not have the Rinnegan, so it is impossible for him to absorb souls in a true sense, as such he will definitely suffer. Orochimaru is the best example. The souls absorbed by Orochimaru using Fushire Tensei did not disappear. Instead, they were sleeping like a cocoon in the depths of Orochimaru's soul, so not only is there a hidden danger of others' soul taking over, but even the shape and signature of one's own soul will change, which is exactly what happened with Orochimaru, making him especially vulnerable to genjutsu. It is not guaranteed that the same will happen with Hirako courtesy to the Sharingan, but he won't be out of complete danger. And as Tsukihei expected, the negative effects of absorbing 5 souls at once immediately became apparent. His maniacal laughter ceased, and he clutched his head with both of his hands, hissing and suffering from severe pain. Looking from his distorted expression, it seemed as if something scary was raging in his mind. At the same time, Hiroko's body also started to fall apart, pieces of his hands and legs separated, distorted. Tissues started to fall off of his body. But the body parts that fell off were all caught by the gluey substance and put back little by little, repairing his body, stopping him from dying. Now the success or failure of the Kekkai Genkai absorption ritual became a battle of collapse and repair. Hiroko was obviously not able to withstand both physical pain and pain coming from deep in his soul, as such his current appearance was no longer the same, and was changed into a blob of flesh, bones, organs, vessels, and fluids, but because of the existence of the gluey leech, no matter how much his body collapsed or suffered it was constantly reassembled back. But the pain is also insufferable, and definitely not something that people can bear. Except for Konan who had her cold expression back, and Shinichi who had a look of disgust, everyone else's faces had a clear look of shock, even Tendo Pain's indifferent expression had slight waves. At this time, the flashing curtain of green aurora in the sky started to dim. As the curtain of aurora started to dim, the light rays and light particles falling from the sky also started to dim. It was clear that the aurora was about to disappear, and as such everyone was clear, if the ritual is not completed before the disappearance of the aurora, then this Kekkai Genkai absorption ritual will be a failure. And seeing that the aurora was about to disappear, everyone could only think that Hiroko would fail, but then something shocking happened. At the moment just before the disappearance of the aurora, Hiroko's shouts abruptly stopped. The blob of flesh contracted into a spherical core. Immediately afterward, the gluey-lychee substance spread on the floor began to merge into the spherical core which was Hiroko's body. As the gluey substance merged with Hiroko's body, the violent chakra reaction also gradually stabilized. Then with an exploding sound, the core expanded and turned into Hiroko. He was able to survive. Tsukihai was stunned, then thought, no, Hiroko is just an ordinary shinobi with no special traits, how could he survive the collapse and disintegration of his body? He must have used some other technique, besides the chimera technique. A technique which can repair his body, and increase its strength to be able to bear the pressure of chimera technique. After completing the ritual, Hiroko stood up on the ritual platform. He did not have any clothes on his body at this moment so he stood naked, but he was not bothered in the slightest, and his eyes fell on Uchiha Tsukihai and Oto Yumi. Standing at the center of the five-pointed star formation, Hiroko breathed heavily, his chest undulating up and down, and steam coming out from his body. Tsukihai observed intently and noticed that Hiroko's figure seemed much stronger than before. He was no longer short, but was back to his normal body size, with a slender and fit body, perfect for a rejuvenated young man. From just one glance, people could see that his body was brimming with power. Aside from the chiseled muscles that of a shinobi, his skin also seemed unnaturally tender and delicate, so much so that his skin did not have the rosy look that a human has, but rather it was as white as chalk and pale as that of a corpse, like that of a vampire. Huff, huff. After catching his breath, Hiroko picked up the simple piece of white lab gown and put it on. Although he looked physically exhausted, the expression on his face said the opposite, as it had clear signs of euphoria, ecstasy, intoxication, bliss, and joy. All the thoughts that he has kept hidden within his heart for the past 2 decades were now out in the open. He no longer cared about maintaining his humble attitude, there was no false expression on his face, at this moment he was his truest self. Under Hiroko's aggressive gaze, Tsukihai's heart thumped for a moment. Undoubtedly, Hiroko, who has successfully completed the Kekkai Genkai absorption ritual, now eagerly wants to test his own strength. And among the people present here at the moment, most of them are official members of Akatsuki, with the only exception being Uchiha Tsukihai and Oto Yumi. And Hiroko would obviously not attack the other members of Akatsuki in the presence of Tendo Pain, so Uchiha Tsukihai and Oto Yumi became the natural target for him to test out his newly achieved strength. And naturally, Tsukihai wasn't the only one who realized Hiroko's thought. The members of Akatsuki who were watching the ritual consciously jumped backward, leaving only 4 people on the site, that being Hiroko, Uchiha Tsukihai, Oto Yumi, and Uchiha Shinichi, who was a little hesitant to leave Tsukihai behind. Unlike Shino, who had a natural smile on his face, and did not care about the safety of Oto Yumi at all, Shinichi glanced at Tsukihai with a worried expression. Tsukihai smiled gently and bowed towards Shinichi. Do not worry, Shinichi-sama, I shall not disappoint you. Shinichi questioned, are you sure? You don't have to do it if you don't want to. Tsukihai shook her head and said, I am. If I back away here then that would be a stain on the reputation of Shinichi-sama, and I would rather die than let that happen. Shinichi sighed and said, very well, but know this, I will take action if I deem necessary, and you are not allowed to get killed or injured here. Leaving this sentence, Shinichi also jumped out of the platform, and similar to other members of Akatsuki, he paid close attention to the three individuals. It wasn't just Hirako who was eager to test out his newly gained strength, but even the other members of Akatsuki were very interested to know just how strong Hirako has become after successfully completing the Kekkai Genkai absorption ritual. Tsukihai was surprisingly calm at this moment. When she glanced at Yumi, she wasn't surprised to find that Yumi was the same as her. There was no trace of fear in either one's eyes. Ha 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 ha, Hirako laughed wildly, seeing the calmness of the two. Tsukihai's Sharingan was already activated and her hand was on the hilt of her katana, ready to be drawn out at any moment. Yumi tilted her neck to the side. Contrary to her leisure expression, she also seemed fully ready for the upcoming battle, as her hands were inside the kimono sleeve she was wearing. Hirako suddenly stopped laughing, and said, "At this time, in the face of the person standing before you, both of you should not have shown any other emotion aside fear. If you did, then maybe things would have turned out much better for both of you." Tsukihai did not reply, but slandered Hirako in her heart. "Hirako, you are being too arrogant for your own good." Yumi on the other hand giggled, and said in a sultry tone, "In that case, why don't Hirako-sama show us ladies what true fear is? I believe it would be worth an experience." Tsukihai immediately blushed. Just what is Orochimaru even saying? Both Yumi and Hirako glared at each other, one with a fierce expression and the other with a mocking one. Finally, Hirako raised his hand to print the hand seals. Swift release, shadowless flight. Whoosh! Instantly Hirako disappeared from his position. So fast! Tsukihai exclaimed inwardly, and her body instinctively drew out the katana strapped at her waist. Ding! Steel release, impervious armor. She barely held the flat part of the katana in front of her to block the straight punch coming from Hirako's black fist. At the moment when Hirako's punch collided with the katana, a loud metal collision sound rang throughout the mountain. Tsukihai used her other hand to slash at the opponent with a kunai, but Hirako was no longer in front of her. Steel release. Swift release. These two words immediately flashed in Tsukihai's mind, and she was surprised that Hirako was able to switch between two Kekkai Genkai seamlessly after just having completed the ritual. Ding! Ding! While Tsukihai started analyzing, another series of metal collision sound rang out from the other side of the battleground. Because Hirako possesses two extremely strong Kekkai Genkai that enhance his taijutsu abilities, so even Yumi, secretly Orochimaru, one of the strongest shinobi alive, was also suppressed. It's also because Orochimaru did not intend to reveal all his abilities here, by Hirako for a moment. It's just that Hirako is not as experienced as Yumi. As such, even though Hirako managed to suppress Yumi, he was unable to inflict any serious damage. Ha! Tsukihai grinned and ran forward. With the addition of Tsukihai, the battle turned from 1 versus 1, between Hirako and Yumi, to 2 versus 1, with Tsukihai and Yumi on one side, and Hirako on the other. Tsukihai and Yumi worked in a surprising tacit understanding and were easily able to not only fight back on the even grounds but even suppressed Hirako from time to time in the physical warfare, which included taijutsu, kenjutsu, shurikenjutsu, bokujutsu, etc. Hirako's lack of combat experience and lack of combat awareness compared to Tsukihai and Yumi was clearly apparent in this battle. And this is also a normal thing. Hirako has been focusing his attention on the research and development of the Chimera technique. As such, he lacks experience compared to the sensei-disciple pair who have experienced so many battles. Moreover, Hirako has just obtained new forms of power, so in terms of application, he obviously lacks the necessary familiarity. As such, there are obvious shortcomings. And neither of the two kunoichi he is fighting against is ordinary, with one of them being an inflamed Sannin, and the other one having the only eternal Manjikyu Sharingan currently existing in the shinobi world, so it is obvious that he is in a slight disadvantage. After all, unless it is too big of a difference in strength, experience also plays a very important role in a battle. And combat experience is not something one can gain in just 1 or 2 days or steal from others. It is pure hard work that requires one to pour sweat and blood, and gained by overcoming tests and trials of countless life and death battles. But Kuroto knows that so long as strength is high, overcoming the lack of experience is not that much of a problem. On a high cliff covered with vegetation, Zetsu said mockingly, he can't even deal with just 2 subordinates of the official members of the organization? It seems that all this Kekkai Genkai absorption ritual was just a waste of time. However, the masked man who has been observing everything up to now stood up and said with a serious tone, "No. Although Hirako's performance is not as good as my initial expectations, that is more of a lack of time he has had with his new powers. What I am more surprised about is the strength displayed by the 2 women. Neither of them can be considered ordinary or weak. among the other spectators watching the battle. Sasori looked at Shino and said with a ridicule expression, "Your assistant seems much better than you." Shino just shrugged helplessly, he didn't really care about Sasori's opinions. Biwa Juzo on the other side said to Shinichi, "The Uchiha shinobi are really extremely strong in terms of physical warfare, and looking at her movements, with precise actions, simple, neat, and flawless form, she seems to be a better kenjutsu master than even you Shinichi, and as a kenjutsu master I have to admire her." Shinichi nodded with a solemn look. "I knew for a fact that she was strong, but I am rather surprised that she has grown up to this extent since the last time I saw her. It appears that I can't laze around or I will be overtaken by her." Back to the battle. Hiroko's anger started to rise as he was gradually being overwhelmed by the two women. Suddenly he leaped back, quickly printed the hand seals, and shouted, "Why don't you two just die already?" Storm release, thundercloud inner wave. Instantly a thick ring of black thunderclouds and electricity appeared around Hiroko. Tsukihai instantly put back the katana in the sheath, and printed the hand seals, fire release, fireball technique. Yumi was able to realize the jutsu that Tsukihai was using and also completed the hand seals at almost the same instant, earth release, earth flow river. The timing of Yumi's earth jutsu was impeccable and it trapped Hiroko in a muddy river just an instant before Tsukihai's fire jutsu was about to hit him. Hiroko chuckled in disdain at the pathetic attempt of the two ladies. He immediately stretched out his hand towards the huge fireball coming towards him. Dark release, inhaling maw. Following Hiroko's action, the huge fireball coming towards him was immediately sucked into his hand in a spiraling whirl. Hiroko did exactly the same with the earth flow river below his feet and absorbed the chakra. With the suction of chakra, the earth flow river lost its effects, making Hiroko free. After regaining his movement, Hiroko said with a chuckle, "Both of you have a very delicious chakra." Tsukihai thought to herself, he really can freely use all the Kekkei Genkai he has absorbed, and Dark Release make most of the ordinary ninjutsu useless against him. Killing him without the use of Susanoo would be very difficult. Unfortunately, I can't reveal my Susanoo here, else it would put both this clone and Shinichi in a danger. Yumi's face also had a thoughtful look. Yumi, or Orochimaru, is a type of shinobi who is an expert in almost all forms of combat, be that taijutsu or kenjutsu, ninjutsu or fuinjutsu, genjutsu or juinjutsu, so although her combat effectiveness is not that restricted, she still doesn't have a very good way of dealing with Hiroko without giving off her true identity, and she would obviously not do something foolish like revealing her true identity in front of entire Akatsuki. As such, the methods she can use to deal with Hiroko are quite limited. Moreover, Hiroko is almost immune to most of the ninjutsu as well as physical warfare type attacks courtesy to the 5 Kekkei Genkai he has selected. As such, even with her experience, Yumi doesn't have a very good way to fight Hiroko. Thinking so, Yumi turned to look at Uchiha Tsukihai. She has been paying close attention to Tsukihai throughout the battle, and she was highly surprised to find that similar to her, Tsukihai has also been calm and collected from beginning to end. Which is unexpected according to her. In Yumi's opinion, she, a Sannin, with experience of thousands of battles, deep knowledge of many kenjutsu, along with various means to be able to make it out alive even in the worst case scenario, is calm in the face of a monster like Hiroko is understandable. But Tsukihai, a 17 or 18-year-old kunoichi with just 3 Tomo Sharingan, facing a monster like Hiroko, who can literally use 5 different types of Kekkei Genkai to deal with all kinds of situations, is still calm and not afraid is not a simple matter. Even Yumi, Orochimaru, the temporary teammate of Tsukihai, can't help but respect such mental fortitude, but sigh at the same time. The Uchiha clan's arrogance doesn't put anyone in their eyes. Crackling. Zzzzzzzzzzzzz. At this moment, Hiroko waved his hand. The storm clouds that were covered the top of the mountain suddenly sent outbursts of electric discharge. As lightning started to rage the mountain, Hiroko, who was shrouded in lightning, spoke, "That's the end of the warm-up, now let's get serious and take this fight up a notch." And immediately Hiroko disappeared from his position. With the movement of Hiroko, the lightning also raged all over the platform, and for a moment it seemed as if the entire ritual platform became a pool of dazzling blue lightning. Wherever it fell, the rock pieces vaporized. Tsukihai with her Sharingan noticed Hiroko's running trajectory, and without any hesitation, she drew out her katana and threw it along the predicted trajectory. Whyish! The katana flew out and went towards Hiroko. Although Hiroko managed to avoid the katana, all the lightning covering him hit the katana's metallic blade, which is a conductor. Tsukihai did not waste that opportunity and immediately shot out several kunai. The ends of kunai were tied with thin metal wire, and with the assistance of her Sharingan, Tsukihai shot the kunai in such a direction, which greatly limited Hiroko's movements because of the metal wire. But Tsukihai did not stop there and subsequently shot kunai tied with large strings of explosive tags. The targets were Hiriko's eyes, throat, both axilla, then, ribs, Achilles heel of the body. All the kunai were shot in the blink of an eye, and with such precise actions that even the Akatsuki members were all amazed. Even Hiriko was caught off guard for a moment as his body was entangled by the metal wires. Just when Hiriko was about to get rid of the metal wires that restricted his movements, he suddenly noticed the next set of kunai tied with a series of explosive tags also wrapping around him. And from the sound made by explosive tags, they were about to explode any movement. Steel release, impervious armor. With Hiriko's angry shout, his body hardened and darkened. Break. Break. With his solidified body, Hiriko easily broke free of the metal wires that bound him. But before he can celebrate, two rubbery pale white arms suddenly stretched out of nowhere and bound Hiriko. And because the two arms were rubbery, which means they could stretch and shrink like rubber, so even if Hiriko tried to break free of them, he was unable to. Boom. 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 At this time, the explosive tags also exploded, which led to a series of violent explosions that shook the entire mountain, covering the entire platform in fire dust and smoke. Yumi immediately retracted her arms, then printed the hand seals to cast a simple wind-style jutsu to blow away the cover of dust and smoke. And just as the cover of dust and smoke cleared, the figure of Hiriko, who was the center of the explosion, was immediately revealed. From the first look, Hiriko doesn't seem to have suffered any injury. But Hiriko's face was gloomy. He stood at his position for a few seconds while Tsukihai and Yumi took deep breaths. The atmosphere was extremely quiet, but both the kunoichi knew that this was just a silence before the storm. And as the drop of sweat that slid down her face dropped on the floor, Hiriko's figure disappeared and instantly appeared in front of Yumi. Yumi, who was already prepared for the coming attack, was about to leap back, but just for an instant before she could do so, the eyes of Yumi and Hiriko crossed, and immediately Yumi stopped dead in her position, her head bent down as if she was unconscious. Genjutsu. Tsukihai was startled, and only then did she notice the scarlet pupils with three black tomo spinning in Shinichi's eyes. Yumi's, Orochimaru's, biggest weakness is Genjutsu. Even in the original story, Orochimaru suffered because of the Sharingan's Genjutsu, but at that time his opponent was Uchiha Itachi, who had Mangekyo Sharingan. And who Uchiha Itachi is must not be forgotten. So even if Orochimaru was subdued by Itachi, it cannot be said that Orochimaru's Genjutsu resistance is so poor that he would be affected so easily. And the fact that the Genjutsu cast by Hiriko can affect Orochimaru must mean that the pair of Sharingan in his eye sockets is unusually strong. Although not to the level of Mangekyo Sharingan, the ocular power is still very high.
If you want to support me, check out my Patreon at https://www.patreon.com/Kaioshin. I tend to polls that decide important plot stuff in my P at Trian. Many thanks to my awesome patrons: Ben Phillips, Yami Tancho, Kenny Nielsen, Harold Martinsons. If you enjoyed the content, don't forget to give it a like and subscribe to the channel. I'll be here until next time.